Good morning. Welcome to another in our series of instructional videos brought to you by the NOMMA Education Foundation. I'm Lloyd Hughes, and this is my assistant Paget. Today's topic, as you may have already guessed, is gates, or more specifically, walk gates, sometimes known as garden gates. There are three things you need to consider when beginning any gate project, whether it be a single 3-foot wide gate like I have here, or a large pair of driveway gates. And those would be, what is the gate going to hang off of? Is there a provision to mount the gate to it, or do you have to provide that? What sort of hinging are you going to use? In this case, I have a machined hinge, upper machined portion. The bottom is drilled to accept a pivot that is mounted to the ground. The third thing, does the gate need to lock or latch? Or maybe you need to make provisions for holding the gate open, as in a driveway gate. In the case of this gate, I have a mortised passage latch to hold the gate closed. We don't need a lock because there's a lot of traffic in and out of here. Before we go back and get started on our gate project, let's take a look at a few of the details with this gate. I have these upper scrolls that have been riveted in place. The decorative elements at the bottom of the gate have collars holding them in place. When designing a gate for your client, never assume anything. Too often, we have cases where you design and build a gate, and your client comes back to you later and says, "But my dog can get out of it." So talk to your client first and make sure that the spacing of any of the decorative elements that you put in your gate are going to meet their needs, whether it be for an animal or for children. Just take that into consideration when you're designing. Now I guess it's time to go back to the studio and start building our own gate project. As we discussed earlier, there are three elements that you need to consider before building a gate. One is, what is the gate going to hang off of? Two, what sort of hinging are you going to use? And three, what provisions are you making to latch or to lock the gate? The first one we're going to deal with is what the gate is going to hang off of. And by this mock-up, you can see I have a masonry column, and embedded in it I have a steel post with a steel arm projecting out of it, which my hinge will weld to. The gate that we just looked at, there was a 3-inch steel post embedded in the masonry column with a 1-inch by 3-inch arm projecting out. If you come into the project after the column has been built and there is no provision to hang the gate off of, then you will probably have to come up with an arm with a back plate that you would bolt to the column or to the wall or post or whatever it is you're mounting to. The hinges that I prefer to use are a machined hinge from a solid post. This particular hinge has been turned about 2.5 inches, and inside of this is a bronze bushing. The bottom has been drilled to accept a pin from which the gate will pivot. To ease in that pivoting, there is also a hardened steel ball or a ball bearing inside of here that the gate pivots on. Maintenance is always a concern when you hang a gate. So in this case, what I prefer to do is provide grease fittings both at the lower and the upper hinge. I put them on the back side so that they're not visible. Now that we've seen an example of an actual gate and looked at this mock-up, let's go ahead and build one of our own. I have my post machined to accept the upper hinge. This area has been turned. It's about 3.5 inches long by 3/4 diameter. I'll add bronze bushings to this, and this will be the rest of my upper hinge that will in turn weld to the arm that's going to project out of the wall to hang the gate off of. I've heated and distressed the material under the air hammer, and I've tapered the top of it and formed this flame detail. Let's go over to the forge and see how I did that. Now, running it under the die of the power hammer has given me a little more texture than what I'm looking for. So what I'm going to do is go back under a different hammer, and I'm going to use this flattener to smooth out some of those high spots. What I'm going to do now is show how I go about tapering the end of this so that I can create that flame detail that I showed you on the hinge post. I'm going to take another heat on this and then take it back and smooth it under the hammer with the flattener. I've gone ahead and tapered this piece of material, which is 3/4 by 1.5 inches, the same size as the stile on the lock side of the gate. I've drawn it down to about half of the width and approximately half of the thickness. That is how we go about making that detail. Now our gate is going to have a mortise lock set in it. So in order to accept the lock, I've cut a hole in the stile. I've added these tabs to mount the lock to. The hole itself I cut out with a torch and then cleaned it up by using this band file with an abrasive belt on it. And with our hole cleaned and our tabs in place to screw our lock set to, our lock will fit snugly in place. Since our gate is just a rectangle, the layout of it is relatively simple. I want the gate to be 28¼ inches wide. That includes the hinge post. I want the detail at the top of the hinge post to project up 7 inches from the top of our top rail. And the body of the gate itself will be 55 inches. Now if I can keep everything within those lines, I should have something that works. What I'm doing now, I'm drilling a hole in my upper hinge member that I will then tap to accept a grease fitting. Now I'm going to drill a hole for our lower hinge. Now that I've drilled a hole for my lower hinge member and for my upper hinge, I'm going to go ahead and tap it to accept a grease fitting. Once I get those holes tapped, I'm going to go ahead and assemble the rest of my upper hinge and have that done and out of the way. It's easier than to wait till once the gate is assembled to do that. On this sample hinge post, I will show you how our hinge is going to operate. I've drilled and tapped a hole and added a grease fitting. I try to always do that on the back side as it will be less conspicuous. Inside of this hole, I will put this steel ball bearing, and then the bottom pivot, which has been drilled so that I can mount it to the ground. That will fit up in there. And the lower hinge will pivot like that. In order to complete our upper hinge, I've got a bronze bushing here that is 3/4 inch ID by 1 inch OD that I'm going to fit around the machined portion of our post. Now ideally you'd like to have one that was 3 inches long, but since they were out of them, I'm going to use 2 1.5 inch long bushings. And all I've done is I've cut them in two. I'm going to fit them around the machined portion. And they're on here simply so when I complete the upper hinge, I don't have steel against steel. This will prevent it from seizing up. With the bushings in place, I fit the hinge around, the rest of the hinge around like this. I'll go ahead and weld it, and we'll be ready to proceed. Now that we have our hinge post done, and we have this style on the lock side of the gate, we're going to form the bottom rail, which is made from 1/2 inch by 1.5 inch material. And you notice we've got this wave pattern going, so I need to lay out where I want those waves to occur, taking care to maintain the proper spacing that I want in the gate. In the interest of time, I've already gone ahead and formed my bottom rail, but let me show you how I laid it out and do some of the bending for you. I started with a piece that was longer than what I needed. Now, when I did a sample piece to test this, I discovered that in bending it, I was losing about 1/4 inch in between my holes. So I had to allow for, if I wanted them 6 inches on center, I had to make my marks 6 1/4. Six and 1/4. And 6 1/4. This will give me the high spots on the top of it. Now, in order to form on the other side, I need to turn it over and mark in between these. So I will go 3 1/8, 6 1/4. Six and 1/4. And 6 1/4. Let's go over to the Hausfeld bender and bend it. Now with all my marks in place, I'll go ahead and start the bending. These marks here indicate that this is the top side of the rail. So I'm going to bend one on the bottom, turn it over, do the top, back on the bottom, now if this were the actual piece, I would take it and check it for consistency of bends and probably have to adjust a little bit here and there to make it work. But since I already have the piece done that we're going to use, we'll just continue on to the next step. For the top rail, it is done the same way as the bottom, except that we've allowed for this flat portion before our wave started. With our bottom rail bent, I've gone ahead and drilled these holes 6 inches on center. Those holes are used to secure these floral patterns that we will work on next. These pieces have a tenon formed on the bottom, and that tenon will pass through the hole in our bottom rail and be peened over to secure them in place. Now we're going to begin on the floral portion of our design. And our first step is working on the stem, and we're going to form this tenon at the top of our stem. This is where our flower will attach to. Once that is done, we will add this ball to the center, and at this ball is where our leaves will attach. We'll follow that by forming this curve and finish it up with these leaves at the bottom. What I'm going to do is form a 1/4 inch tenon on the end of this 5/8 inch round bar. Now in order to do that, I've scored a line around the bar using the bandsaw. From that mark out, I'm going to hammer this to form a 1/4 inch diameter tenon. I'm going to hammer it square, and then I'm going to use a swedge to form that 1/4 inch round. That's where my flower will attach to. Now that I've hammered it to a 1/4, maybe 5/16 inch square, I'm going to use a swedge tool. This one is set up for 3/8 or 1/4 inch. I'm going to use the 1/4 inch portion, feed my material in and turn it as I hammer, thus forming a 1/4 inch tenon. Now that I've got my 1/4 inch tenon drawn, I'm going to put it in this monkey tool and hammer the end to square up the shoulder. Our next step is to add the ball form. In order to form the ball at this area, I have a piece of 1 inch diameter with a 5/8 hole drilled in the center of it. I've cut it about 3/4 of an inch thick. I'll slip it over the end. Take it down to the spot that I've marked on my bar. Now I'm going to heat that up and hammer it in a ball form that I have over here. We now have our ball formed, and that is where our horizontal leaves will attach. What I'm going to do is take the stem that we're working on. I've got the end of it heating. I'm going to clamp it into this jig that I've made, the tenon going against this portion. I'm going to pull it around. Once I get it around this, I will add the other portion of the jig here and then pull it straight down to create the crook that we have in that. I'm cooling the end of it in the water so the tenon won't bend while I'm working on it. Clamp that in place. Now I can cool this, and then using the heating torch I can localize the heat and bend it the rest of the way. Now that we have the top bent, it's time to start working on the leaves at the bottom. The next step is I'm going to form sort of a simulated water leaf for the bottom of our forms. And in order to do that, I'm going to take 5/8 inch round. I'm going to taper the end of it, and then I'm going to flatten a section 6 or 8 inches long under the power hammer. I want to spread it to where it's about 1 inch to 1.25 inches wide, so that 2 pieces will wrap around the stem, which is 5/8 inch diameter. There, if I've taken the leaf that far, that's sufficient. Now what I'm going to do, I've got another tool that I'm going to run the leaf through, which will dish it for me to help fit around a piece of 5/8 round. Now I work that leaf over the die in this direction because the die is curved, and because it's curved that way, it will spread it from side to side. If I worked at it from this direction, it would lengthen it. What I wanted to do, come from this direction, and I wanted to spread that leaf. This is the tool I'm going to use to dish out my leaf so that it'll fit around the 5/8 round stem. It's just simply a piece of angle with a piece of 5/8 round that's good. I'm going to feed the material through and hammer down, and that will go down and shape the leaf to where I want it. Now I want to just roll the end over the edge of the anvil, form a little curve to it, and there we have it. Now I said this was sort of a modified or a simulated water leaf. If I wanted to make it more of a water leaf, I'd take a bottom swedge tool like I have here, and a hammer, and I would hammer it would cause the ripples that you see in a typical water leaf. But for what we're doing, I think the simpler version is much nicer. I've clamped the leaf to the stem. Now I'm going to weld it on, grind it, and then I'm going to heat it and hammer it again to dress up that weld. You can see that I've gone ahead and formed a tenon on the end of my stem. I did this in the same way that I did the tenon at the top. The only difference being this one is 3/8 diameter, whereas the other one was 1/4 diameter. Now let me grind that, and then I'll put it back in the fire and heat it and hammer it to dress up that weld. As you can see, I've heated this and hammered it to dress up the weld. I've also gone ahead and drilled holes in the side of the ball which will accept these leaves. Our next step is to form a flower that will fit over the tenon at the top of this stem. Now that our stems are completed, it's time to start on the flowers. I've cut these out of a piece of 1/4-inch plate. What I'm going to do is heat them and run them under the hammer to thin the edges. Then I'm going to shape them partially over this stake. Now that I have them hammered this much, I'm going to heat them again and start forming them over the stake. Now before we shape the leaf, I'm going to take this chipping hammer and just go around the outer edge . Just to add a little visual interest. Okay, now that I've worked on the outer edges, what I want to do is sink the center of the flower. So I have just a ring that I'm going to drive it into. With that, we have a flower. Maybe once it's in place, I can do some final shaping of the edges of the leaves. Once this cools, I'll drill a hole in the center for it to slip over the tenon in the stem. Now that I have the flower formed, it's time to add it to our stem. I've drilled a hole to accept the tenon. Now what I need to do is heat the tenon and peen it over to form a rivet head to hold that in place. Now I can continue that way with that ball peen hammer, or I could make the job a little bit easier. Welcome to day 2 of our gate building project. What we have to do now is create these leaves that are going to go off of our stem. I'm going to use a piece of 5/8 round material, hammer it into the leaf form at the end, and then neck the rest of it down to 3/8 inch diameter using a swedge tool. The first thing I'm going to do is taper the end of it slightly. I'm going to come back about 1.5 inches. Now I'll move to the side and spread the leaf. Again, by working on the die from this direction, because it's curved, it will cause the leaf to spread. Now I'm going to heat it again and neck this down. Now that I have roughed this down to approximately 3/8 square, I'm going to go into the swedge tool and turn that to 3/8 round. Now, just as easy as that, I have myself a leaf formed. What I will do, I'll go over on the belt sander and just true up these edges slightly. One thing I could do would be to create a die to hammer out all my leaves, but that way they would all look the same. I prefer the fact that they're all just a little bit different. Now that my leaves are completed, I've gone ahead and I've cut them 3 3/4 inches long. And I've tapered the end of it slightly to fit into the corresponding hole in the ball that's on the stem. I've made a simple fixture to hold them in place. And with both of them in place, I can simply run a small weld around there and then clean that up. And we'll be ready to begin assembly. Now, if this were a project that you were going to put an oil and wax finish on, and you wanted to address this area that's been ground and is now suddenly shiny, the easiest thing to do is put it back in the fire and heat that area. That'll create a uniform coloring throughout it. Let that heat to a red heat. Pull it out, quench it in water, and the color will be uniform. Okay, using our overhead projector and a clear transparency, I projected our design against this steel table. I've chalked some lines that tell me the actual width of the gate so that I know that scale-wise it's correct. You'll see that we've got a little distortion over at the other side. But that's because the table is not exactly square to the projector. But I know, judging by this hinge post, we're in pretty good shape. So all I need to do is chalk an outline of these pieces, then take our other material, which is 1/2 inch by 2 inch, and hammer it and heat it and bend it to meet those shapes. I've gone ahead and with chalk, I've outlined our patterns. And now, since this is a table, I can turn the table back right side up, and I've got my marks on a steel surface that I can work off of. Now that our tapering is done, we can start to shape them to meet our pattern. We've started bending our pieces. I'm going to add a little bit more curve to the end of this piece. Most of this I can bend in the Hausfeld bender. Take a little bit out of here. I've been able to bend the narrower cross sections cold, but as we get back here more like 2 inches wide, I've had to put a little heat on it to help me. Let's see what we've got. Okay, a little bit. Okay, now what I'm going to do here is I'm going to hammer them to spread the ends, and then they'll be ready to attach. Now that we've completed these pieces, it's time to work on this curved piece, which is made from a piece of 1/2 by 1¼ inch, and this is bent to a 12-inch radius. Also, we have our lock box to deal with. Now we're back at the Hausfeld bender, and I have this set up to bend this piece to a 12-inch radius. We have an outside die and an inside die of corresponding sizes. These are both for a 12-inch radius. And I'll simply feed my material through and pull. Now let's go over and assemble that to our gate. I've gone ahead and assembled our gate frame. I've added this radius piece here, and I've also bent a piece of 1/2 by 1 inch to a 6-inch radius for our lock box. I'll explain what these pieces are as we get a little further along. Up in this area, I've cut and hammered a piece of copper that will fit in. There'll be one for the front and one for the back. And in order for it to stay in place, I'm going to have to add a piece on the inside of our framework for the copper to sit down and attach to. So I'll go ahead and bend a piece for the inside and cut and add 2 pieces along the outside. Okay, I've gone ahead and added a 3/4 inch square frame inside of here, and I've drilled a series of 1/4 inch holes. And what that is going to do is give a spot for our copper to rest. I'll reach through from the back side and mark the hole so I can drill this copper. there'll be another piece of copper on the other side of the gate. Now that we have this done, our next step is to start installing our flowers. Okay, now we're going to add the pieces to the bottom. And you remember we formed a tenon on the bottom of it. It's going to go through the bottom hole. Put these. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to drill a hole through these leaves and then come back and mark the leaf underneath it to line up with that hole, and then I'm going to rivet them together. Now that I have our flowers and stems in place, I'm going to hold them together using some 3/16 round-headed rivets. Now, all I have to do is heat the rivet up, and with a heading tool that I have here, I can peen that over and form another round head to match this one. Now that I've got the upper leaves riveted in place, it's time to rivet the stems to the frame. Now the first thing I need to do is keep these from moving, so I have this series of clamps and a bar that will hold everything in place, and I'll go and heat the tenon, get it started with the ball peen hammer, and then finish it off with the rivet hammer. Start it with the hammer and finish it off. Now that we have our bottom elements done, it's time to get back to the top. I've got these pieces fit. Now it's time to weld them in. I'm going to weld them around the top. And over here I'm going to come along and weld it on the back side to make that a little less noticeable. To complete the copper detail at the top of the gate, I need to make another fan-shaped piece like I have here. This is 22 gauge copper, and all I've done is drawn a series of lines radiating out from the corner. I'm going to go over and I'm chiseling these to create this ripple effect. This piece has been annealed, which means that I've heated it to cherry red, and I've quenched it in water to soften it, make it easier to work with. Now that we've got that much done, we'll mark it for size, trim it to fit, and then put it in place. We have our copper in place now, and what I've done, I've temporarily put it in place with some brass screws, but I'm going to take that off so that I can sandblast the gate and paint it. Once that's done, I'll put the copper pieces on the front and the back, and I'll use some brass rivets to hold it in place. And we'll do the same thing at the lock box. And I told you before I would mention what I've done here. This is so I can rivet the cover to the lockbox in place. Once it's sandblasted and painted, come back and with some rivets, we'll rivet the lock box in place. Then we can add our lock, which will fit just like that. Now that the fabrication is completed, all that's left for us to do is to clean up and paint. I hope that what you saw here was beneficial to you and you got something out of it. On behalf of the NOMMA Education Foundation, thank you very much.